Prologue, the last contract. The contract was simple. A senator's son, a hotel suite, no witnesses, paid in cash through 3 shell accounts. Yin Wei. He had been calling himself Yin Wei for 2 years now, because the man who had originally owned the name had died in a Macau hospital, and Yin Wei the killer had absorbed the paperwork, read the brief twice on the plane, and burned it before landing. He killed the senator's son in the bathtub at 4 in the morning. Clean cut. 2 minutes. No spatter outside the porcelain. He cleaned the blade on the man's robe, packed his tools, and walked out through the service stairwell with a maintenance cart's keycard. He was 20 feet from the rear exit when the floor split open beneath him. He had time to register that this was not metaphorical. The marble tile cracked along a perfect circle. The crack glowed. The glow swallowed his knees, his chest, the cart. His last thought as the dark closed over him was not regret. He had not done regret in 19 years of this work. His last thought was, Then the dark took him. When he opened his eyes, he was on a stone floor in a room that smelled of incense and old wood, and a thin woman in dark green silk was screaming at someone 2 doors away. He sat up. His body was wrong. Lighter. Younger. He looked at his hands and saw fingers that had never held a syringe of his particular preferred sedative. Fingers that had calluses in the wrong places. Sword calluses, not pistol calluses. Calluses earned by holding a long, curved blade with both hands across many years. He flexed them. The body knew them. A spear was leaning against the wall beside him. A short, straight blade in a black lacquered sheath sat across his thighs. A scroll lay open on the low table beyond his knees, and the script on the scroll was Chinese, archaic Chinese, the kind nobody had spoken in 800 years. He could read it. The body could read it. The body could read it because the body had been raised reading it, and the body's name, which surfaced in his head with the slow inevitability of a name remembered after a long sleep, was Yin Wei. He laughed. It was a short, hard laugh. No breath behind it. The thin woman 2 doors away stopped screaming and started crying, which was a different sound, and someone soothed her in a low voice. And Yin Wei the killer, who was now Yin Wei the bodyguard, pulled the short blade out of its sheath an inch and looked at the bright cold edge and registered that the steel was not steel. It was something better. The mark stamped near the hilt was an old Sect mark. A sect he had read about 3 years ago in a web novel he'd finished on a long flight to Frankfurt. He sheathed the blade. He sat very still on the stone floor in the quiet room and thought about what he was looking at. The novel had been called The Lotus That Bloomed in Frost. He had read it because the cover art on the pirated PDF had been pretty and because he had been bored. It had been 140 chapters long, and it had been about a girl named Sue, one who started as a peasant's daughter and ended as an empress, and along the way she had defeated, in order, a corrupt sect elder, an ice bloodline princess, a demon realm assassin, and finally, in chapter 91, the villainess of the second arc, Mei Lan. Mei Lan was the only daughter of the Cold Lotus Hall. She was 23 at the time of her death. She had killed her own father at 16 because he was abusing the Hall's junior disciples, and she had ruled the Hall from 16 on. Her reputation across the cultivation world was that she was cold, arrogant, beautiful, and cruel. The novel had spent 12 chapters on her. She had been killed by Su Wan in an open duel before the gates of her own hall, and her death scene had been very long and very satisfying to the novel's readers, of whom Yin Wei the killer had been one. He had thought, at the time, that the novel had been unfair to her. He had finished the chapter on a transatlantic flight and closed the PDF and not thought about it again until this moment. The thin woman crying in the next room was not Mei Lan. The thin woman was a junior disciple, by the sound of her voice and the depth of her register and the particular bowing rhythm of her sobbing, which was the rhythm of a girl no older than 15. She was crying because Mei Lan had just been informed, 2 doors away, that the rising star of the Southern Circuit, a young swordsman named Chun Yuan, aged 20, a disciple of the Bright Sword Sect, would be arriving at the Cold Lotus Hall in 9 days to demand a duel with Mei Lan over a slight Mei Lan had given his master at last year's tournament. Yin Wei knew the slight. Mei Lan had refused to bow to Chun Yuan's master at the tournament gate because Chun Yuan's master had been carrying, on his belt, a fan made from the hair of one of Mei Lan's junior disciples who had run from the hall at 13 and been captured by a slaver and bought at auction by Chun Yuan's master, who had killed the girl and shaved her for the fan because, in his words, the disciple's hair had been very fine. Mei Lan had not bowed. The Bright Sword Sect had taken offense. Chun Yuan would arrive in 9 days, demand the duel, defeat Mei Lan in front of her own hall, kill 3 of her senior disciples in the aftermath when they objected to the manner of his victory, and ride south with the hall's most prized treasure, a jade pendant that contained, by old sect lore, the soul fragment of the hall's founder. That was chapter 41 of the novel. Yin Wei sat on the stone floor in the body that was now his, and considered the situation with the slow, methodical clarity he had brought to every contract he had ever taken. He was inside a story. He had skills the story did not know about. The story was going to do unpleasant things to a woman who, in his honest read of her on the page, had not deserved them. He stood up. He picked up the short blade. He buckled it to his belt by feel. The body knew the buckles. He opened the door of the room and stepped out into a wide flagstoned corridor lit by oil lamps and walked toward the sound of the thin woman crying. He had a contract to take. He had not been hired for it. He had assigned it to himself. He had 9 days. Part 1. The Bodyguard. Chapter 1. Mei Lan. The Cold Lotus Hall sat on a high terrace cliff above a river the locals called the Pale. The hall's 7 buildings descended the cliff in stepped courtyards, each connected by stairs of black stone, and the lowest courtyard opened onto a wooden dock where the hall's 2 pleasure barges rode at anchor under awnings stitched with silver thread. The hall had 41 senior disciples, 212 juniors, a kitchen staff of 19, a stable of 11 horses, and a single living patriarch, who was Mei Lan, and who was at this moment standing at the rail of the highest courtyard with both hands flat on the stone and her back to the corridor Yin Wei walked out of. She was taller than he had pictured. The novel had described her as small. The novel had been wrong. She stood 5'10" in soft leather boots, and the black braid that fell down her back ended at the small of her back. She wore a robe the color of wet slate, with silver embroidery at the collar in the shape of lotus leaves curled against frost. Her hands on the stone rail were long and thin and very still. She did not turn when Yin Wei stepped onto the courtyard. She said, in a low, even voice that did not lift toward the end of the sentence, "Yin Wei, who told you to come up?" "No one. I came up myself. You do not come up unless I send for you. I am aware of the protocol. I am breaking it." She turned then. Her face was the face from the novel's cover. High cheekbones, sharp narrow chin, eyes the pale gray of a winter sky that has not yet committed to snow. She was tired around the eyes. The novel had not described that. The novel had described her as untouched by anything. She had not been untouched. She had been carrying the hall on her shoulders since she was 16, and you could see the carrying. She said, "You have 1 minute. I will need 3. Her left eyebrow lifted by a fraction. She said, after a count, 3. He walked to the rail and stopped 2 paces from her. He did not look out at the river. He looked at her. He said, "Chun Yuan will arrive in 9 days. He intends to duel you in front of the gate. He intends to kill 3 of your senior disciples in the aftermath when they object to his victory's terms. He intends to leave the hall with the founder's pendant. He will succeed in all 3 intentions unless someone changes the conditions of the duel before he arrives. I am proposing to change them." Mei Lan went very still. She said, after a long count, "How do you know this?" "That answer will take longer than 3 minutes. I will give it to you in private when you decide you want it. In the meantime, I am asking you to authorize me to leave the hall tonight and ride south to meet Chun Yuan on the road. I will be back in 5 days. He will not. Her gray eyes did not blink. She said, You are proposing to assassinate the heir of the Bright Sword Sect. I am proposing to remove the problem before it arrives at your gate. The Bright Sword Sect will declare war on the Cold Lotus Hall the day Chun Yuan does not return. They will declare war eventually. I am proposing to choose the date and the terms. She studied him in the late afternoon sun. He had been her bodyguard for 4 years, by the body's memory. For years of standing 2 paces behind her in council, for years of sleeping outside her door, for years of riding at her left flank on every excursion the hall had taken. She had not, in those 4 years, ever heard him propose anything. He had been silent service. He had been a wall with a sword. She said, Yin Wei, Mei Lan, you have never called me by name before. I am calling you by name today. Explain it. He met her gray eyes across 2 paces of stone in the late golden light. He did not soften. He did not perform. He gave her what he had given to exactly 3 people in his 19 years as a contract killer, the flat, unvarnished truth, delivered without warmth. He said, I woke up this morning with new information. The information is operationally useful. I am proposing to use it. The 4 years before this morning are not relevant to the conversation we are having now. The Yin Wei who has stood behind you for 4 years would not have proposed what I am proposing. The Yin Wei who is standing in front of you would. You will get the explanation tonight, in your chambers, after the hall has gone to bed. The explanation will be unusual. You will probably not believe it on first hearing. You will believe it after the 3rd or 4th piece of predictive evidence I provide. By the morning, you will know I am telling the truth. The duel with Chun Yuan will be the first piece of evidence. There will be more after. The silence that followed was long enough that one of the courtyard's caged falcons resettled itself on its perch with a soft rustle of feathers. Mei Lan said, very quietly, You are asking me to authorize the assassination of a sect heir on the basis of an explanation you will give me tonight. Yes. What assurance do I have that you are not, in some manner I cannot identify, compromised? None. You are going to authorize it because the evidence I will give you tonight will be specific enough that no compromised version of me could fabricate it, and because you have known me for 4 years and you can read whether I am lying. Read me now. I am not lying. She read him. He let her. It took perhaps 30 seconds. He had been read by harder eyes than hers in interrogation rooms in Belgrade and Mexico City. He held her gaze without effort. The body's breathing slowed under his control. His pulse stayed even. She broke the look first. She said, Ride tonight. Take Boyang with you. He is the only senior disciple I will allow to accompany you, and the only one whose discretion I can trust if you do not return. I will not need Boyang. Take him anyway. If something goes wrong with what you are proposing, I would prefer the hall learn of it from a witness whose word I trust, not from a courier of the Bright Sword Sect. Acceptable. Come to my chambers at the 2nd bell of morning when you return. I will. And Yin Wei. Yes. She paused. She looked at him with a quality of attention he had not seen on her face in any of the body's memories. It was the look of a woman trying to place a person she thought she had known. She said, What do I call the man who is standing in front of me? Is he still Yin Wei? He is. He is also someone else. The 2 of them are sharing the same body. The Yin Wei you have known is still in here. The new resident has been added on top of him. You will, from this evening, get the benefit of both. The new resident does most of the talking. The old one does most of the sword work. They are in agreement on the matter of Chun Yuan. The agreement. That you have been mishandled by the script you are inside, and that the script is going to be torn up. Her gray eyes narrowed. She said, Script. I will explain tonight. He bowed to her, a precise short bow, neither too deep nor too shallow, the bow of a senior servant whose status had not changed but whose voice had, and turned and walked back into the corridor. He went to find Boyang. Chapter 2. The Road South. Boyang was 26, a senior disciple of the 3rd rank, a thick-shouldered man with a square jaw and the slow, patient manner of a stonemason. He had been Mei Lan's left hand on every excursion the hall had taken for the past 2 years. He did not, in the body's memory, like Yin Wei very much. He found Yin Wei taciturn. The feeling had been mutual. Bo Yang met Yin Wei at the stables an hour after sundown with 2 saddled horses, a sealed travel letter from Mei Lan, and an expression that suggested he had been ordered to do this against his own preferences. He said, "The patriarch sent me." "I know. Mount up. Where are we going?" "South." "South is a large direction." "South to where?" "You will find out when we get there. We have 5 days of riding. I will explain on the road." Bo Yang looked at him in the lamp's light. He registered, slowly, with the slow, patient registration of a man whose mind worked at the pace of a river, that the Yin Wei in front of him was not exactly the Yin Wei he had been disliking for 2 years. The face was the same. The voice was the same. The posture was different. The eyes were different. He said, "Yin Wei." "Bo Yang, the patriarch trusts you with this errand." "I trust the patriarch. I will ride with you. I will not, however, ride blind. I want the destination by tomorrow morning." "You will have it by tomorrow morning. Mount up." Bo Yang mounted. They rode out of the hall's lower gate at the 3rd bell, took the south road by the river's east bank, and made the first 20 miles before the moon rose. Yin Wei pushed the horses. Bo Yang kept up. By the false dawn, they were at the small posting station at Yellow Reed Ferry, where Yin Wei traded coin for fresh mounts and a bowl of cold rice, and a half-hour of sleep against a wall. When he opened his eyes, Bo Yang was sitting across from him with a piece of dried venison in one hand and a look of careful attention on his broad face. Bo Yang said, "You have not slept properly in 4 years. I do not think I have ever seen you sleep against a wall. I am sleeping differently this week." "Yes, I can see that. I have been watching you ride for 6 hours. You ride differently as well. You are not riding like a man who is escorting a senior disciple. You are riding like a man who is hunting." "What are we hunting?" Yin Wei looked at him in the gray pre-dawn light. He had been planning to extend the silence until they were 2 days farther south, but Bo Yang was, in the body's memory and in the fresh assessment of the new tenant, the kind of operator whose loyalty, once given, did not bend. He was Mei Lan's left hand. He would be at the hall when Yin Wei rode in some unspecified number of days after this trip. He would be at the hall when the war started. He would be at the hall through the war's whole length. He needed to know. Yin Wei said, "Chun Yuan." Bo Yang went very still. "The bright sword heir is riding north to challenge the patriarch in 9 days. That news only arrived at the hall yesterday afternoon. I am moving on the news. The patriarch authorized it." "She did. You are going to challenge Chun Yuan on her behalf before he reaches the hall." "I am not going to challenge him. I am going to kill him in his bed." Bo Yang chewed the dried venison. He chewed for a long time. He said, eventually, "The patriarch authorized that." "She did. She has never authorized an assassination. She has authorized this one. There are reasons. The reasons are mine to explain to her. They will become yours when she decides to share them with you. In the meantime, you have a choice. You can ride with me to the inn outside Huajin where Chun Yuan will be sleeping in 3 nights' time, and you can stand outside the door of his room while I am inside it. Or you can turn around and ride back to the hall and report to the patriarch that you refused the errand. I will not hold either choice against you. The patriarch will not either. Choose." Bo Yang chewed the rest of the venison. He swallowed. He said, "Yin Wei." "Bo Yang, the patriarch has not authorized this kind of thing in 4 years of my service to her. If she has authorized it now, she has reasons that I do not have access to. I am not going to second-guess her. I am riding with you." "Good." "And Yin Wei." "Yes. You are not the man I disliked for the past 2 years. I am going to set the dislike aside for the duration of this errand. After the errand, we can return to it if you prefer." Yin Wei smiled, very faintly. It was the first smile the body had produced since he had woken up in it. He said, "Let us see if either of us still wants the dislike when the errand is finished." Agreed. They rode. The road south from Yellow Reed Ferry curved through hill country before joining the Imperial Trunk Road 2 days down. The Trunk Road moved them faster. By the end of the third day, they were within a half-day's ride of Huajin, and the Inn Chun Yuan and his escort would be staying at Sat in a small town called Pale Stone, 11 miles short of Huajin's gates. The Brightsword Sect had pre-booked the inn for Chun Yuan's party a month in advance. The information had been in the novel as a piece of trivia about the sect's love of comfort. Yanwei had remembered it on the long ride south. He and Bo Yang reached Pale Stone at the 7th bell of evening on the 4th day. They did not stay at the inn. They stayed at a small tea house 3 doors down, took a small upstairs room with a window facing the inn's main entrance, and watched. Chun Yuan's party arrived at the 2nd bell of the next morning, which was earlier than the novel had specified. Yanwei noted the discrepancy with a small flicker of operational concern. The novel had been a representation. Representations carried error. He would, going forward, use the novel's information as a guide rather than a script. The party was 9 men. Chun Yuan, 2 senior disciples, 4 junior disciples, and 2 servants. They took the inn's upper floor in its entirety. The innkeeper closed the lower floor to other guests, on Chun Yuan's coin, and the party went to bed by the 3rd bell. Yanwei waited until the 7th bell. He left Bo Yang at the tea house window with instructions to watch for any movement at the inn's exits, and he went down across the empty street in soft cloth shoes and a dark hooded cloak, and he climbed the inn's rear wall by the kitchen drain pipe, and he entered Chun Yuan's room through the rear window which Chun Yuan had, by the novel's accurate description of his habits, left open a finger's width for the air. Chun Yuan was sleeping on his side, facing the wall, with his sword across his chest in the manner of a bright sword disciple who had been taught from childhood to sleep ready for ambush. Yanwei did not touch the sword. He pressed his left hand over Chun Yuan's mouth and drove the short blade up under Chun Yuan's chin into the base of his brain in a single motion that the body had performed perhaps 800 times in another life, and that this body had never performed but did not need training to perform because the new tenant carried the training. Chun Yuan died in 3 seconds with no sound louder than a hiss of air. Yanwei wiped the blade on the bedding, withdrew it, sheathed it, and crossed to the small writing desk by the room's east wall. He left a note. The note was 3 lines, in a hand that did not match Yanwei's, written with the brush from Chun Yuan's own travel kit, dipped in Chun Yuan's own ink. The note said, "The hair on your master's fan is a debt unpaid. The hall pays its debts. Do not send another." He set the note on Chun Yuan's chest, opened the rear window the rest of the way, climbed back down the drain pipe, recrossed the empty street, and was in the tea-house room before the 8th bell rang. Bo Yang did not ask if it was done. Bo Yang asked, "When do we leave?" "Now." They rode out of Pale Stone at the 8th bell of morning. By the time the Bright Sword Sect servants noticed that Chun Yuan had not come down for breakfast, Yanwei and Bo Yang were 30 miles north of the town. By the time the senior disciples broke the lock on Chun Yuan's door, Yanwei and Bo Yang were across the Pale River. By the time the news of the heir's death reached the Bright Sword Sect's main compound, Yanwei and Bo Yang were at the gates of the Cold Lotus Hall. It was the 2nd bell of morning on the 9th day. Mei Lan was waiting for him in her chambers. Chapter 3: The Explanation. Her chambers were on the highest level of the hall, a single long room with a sliding paper wall on the east side that opened onto a stone balcony above the river. The room had a low writing table, 2 cushions, a tea set in unglazed clay, and a sword rack against the north wall holding 3 blades of escalating value. The most valuable of the 3 was a long, thin, straight sword that had belonged to Mei Lan's father. She had not drawn it in 7 years. She had kept it on the rack because she had not yet decided whether to break it. Mei Lan was sitting at the writing table when Yanwei came in. She had been sitting there since the 8th bell. There was a pot of tea cooling beside her left hand. There was a single folded paper in her right. She did not look up when he closed the door. She said, "Sit." He sat across from her. She set the folded paper down between them. She said, "Bo Yang has reported. He says you killed the bright sword heir in his bed by the 7th bell of yesterday morning. He says you left a note. He says the note's content was such that the bright sword sect will read it as a declaration of war, but will not, by their own internal politics, be able to publicly justify the attack they will need to launch in response. He says, in short, that you have done a piece of work that is, by his honest read of it, beyond his understanding of what you have been for the past 4 years." She looked up. Her gray eyes were tired and very clear. She said, "Tell me." He told her. It took an hour. He told her about the body's death the previous evening in a hotel bathroom on the other side of a world she had not heard of. He told her about waking in this body and recognizing the room. He told her about the novel. He told her about the title of the novel. He told her about the plot of the novel, in summary, with particular attention to her own role in it. He told her about Chun Yuan's intended duel and the death of her senior disciples and the theft of the founder's pendant. He told her about Su Wan, the heroine, who had not yet entered the hall's awareness but who would, in approximately 7 months, be sent by her sect to begin the chain of provocations that ended in Mei Lan's death. He told her, finally, about the chapter in which she died. He told her the chapter's number. He told her the date. He told her the place. He told her the words Su Wan had spoken before the killing blow. Mei Lan listened without speaking. When he was done, she sat for a long count. She poured a cup of tea. She drank it. She poured a second cup and pushed it across the table to him. She drank her own second cup before she spoke. She said, "The words Su Wan was meant to speak before the killing blow." "Yes. You said them in a particular cadence. Repeat the cadence." He repeated it. She closed her eyes. She said, "Yin Wei. Mei Lan. Those are the words my father said to me the night he died. Not the second sentence, the first one. The hall does not love you. The hall has only ever used you. Step aside." He said it to me in the cadence you just used. I have not, in 7 years, repeated that sentence to a single living person. I have not written it down. I have not even, in my own private memory, allowed myself to rehearse it. Your novel, whatever it is, has put those words in the mouth of a girl I have never met, who is going to ride into my hall in 7 months and use them on me. Yes, the script is real. Yes. How does the script know my father's words? I don't know. The novel's author had no way of knowing them. If you have never repeated them aloud, the novel should not have them. The fact that it does, that I am telling you them this morning, is the part of the situation that I cannot, by any means available to me, account for. The honest answer is that the world you live in and the novel I read are connected in a way that neither of us understands. The novel may be a representation of this world that was somehow leaked into mine. Or the novel may be the structure on which this world is built, a script in the architectural sense, not in the storytelling sense. Or there may be a third explanation that neither of us has access to. I am not going to pretend to know. You have been a killer in your previous life. For 19 years. You have killed in this body now once. Once. You intend to kill more. As many as the next 7 months put in front of me. The heroine, Su Wan. Her also. If she comes. The novel says she will come. I will give her the chance to choose otherwise. She is, by the novel's description, 16 years old at the moment Chun Yuan dies. She has not yet been sent on the path that ends at your gate. The sect that will send her is the White Cloud sect of the Western Prefecture. The path begins in 3 months when their senior elder presents her with a sword and a mission. If I intercept the path before the 3 months end, she may never become the figure who arrives at your gate. If I do not intercept it, she will arrive. When she arrives, she will die. I will not allow her to take you. Mei Lan looked at him across the table. She said, very quietly, Yin Wei. Mei Lan, you have, in this conversation, told me that I am the villain of a story written by a person in a world I will never visit, and that the story's heroine will arrive at my gate in 7 months to kill me, and that you are going to break the story before she arrives. You have told me you will assassinate a 16-year-old girl in her own sex compound before she has been given the sword that will start her path. You have told me you will, in service of the same purpose, kill whatever further men or women the story sends against me. You are telling me this in the same voice you have used for 4 years to report on the night's weather. Yes. Why? He looked at her. He had been expecting the question. He had been turning the answer over since he had ridden out of pale stone. He said, 2 reasons. The first is that I read the novel last year and I was, for the duration of the 12 chapters in which you appeared, the only reader I am aware of who was not on Su Wan's side. The novel framed you as cruel. I read you as cornered. The framing was the author's. The text was clear enough that a reader who paid attention could see the cornering underneath the cruelty. I paid attention. When I awoke in your bodyguard's body, I had the option to do nothing and let the script play out. I chose not to. The first reason is therefore that I am unwilling to allow you to be killed by a story that was unfair to you on the page. The second is more honest. I have been a contract killer for 19 years. I have not, in those 19 years, ever taken a contract for the right reasons. The contracts have been money. The money has been useful. The work has been clean. I have not, in 19 years, cared whether the targets deserved what I did to them. I cared whether the work was clean and the pay was good. I am, in the new life this morning has given me, being offered the option to take a contract for the right reason, on my own initiative, with no client and no fee. The target is the story. The story is going to kill a woman who does not deserve to die. I am going to break the story. The second reason is that I have wanted, without knowing I wanted it, to do this kind of work for 19 years. Mei Lan looked at him across the cold tea. She did not, by any measure of her face, react in a way that he could read. She said, after a long count, both reasons are honest. They are. You do not, in either reason, claim to love me. No. Good. I would not have believed you if you had. We have known each other for 4 years in roles that do not produce love, and the man speaking to me this morning has been resident in this body for 1 day. Love would have been a lie. The reasons you have given me are not a lie. They will do. They will do for what? She picked up the folded paper that had been sitting between them all morning. She unfolded it. She said, "This is the writ of stewardship that my father drafted for himself, the one I tore in half on the night I killed him. I have kept it for 7 years. I have not, in those 7 years, drafted a replacement. The hall has been without a steward of formal record for the entire length of my rule. I have run it by force and by reputation. The lack of a formal stewardship has been the single largest vulnerability in my position, and I have been unable to address it because there has been no one in the hall I trusted with the document." She slid the unfolded paper across the table to him. She said, "Your name fits the empty line. I will have a scribe redraft it this afternoon. You will sign it tonight. The signing makes you, by the hall's old laws, the steward of the Cold Lotus Hall. The role is junior only to mine. You will not, in public, exercise it. In private you will. From this morning forward, the hall is administered by the 2 of us. The disciples will be told you are continuing as my bodyguard. The senior disciples will, within a season, register the change. The juniors will not. The world outside the hall will not. The change is internal. I am giving it to you because the work you have just described requires you to operate at a level Yen way the bodyguard cannot operate at, and because the woman whose story you are proposing to break needs, for the breaking, an operational partner who is institutionally inside her hall rather than outside it. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He said, "Mei Lan, Yanwei, you are doing this because you have decided you can use the new tenant in this body. I am doing it because I have decided that the new tenant is the first person who has ever come into this hall and told me, without flinching, that I am the villain of a story and that the story is going to kill me. Everyone else who has ever entered this room has either lied to me about what I am or used what I am against me. You have done neither. You have told me what I am and offered to break the thing that wants to kill me, with no payment and no claim on me beyond the operational partnership. I am rewarding the offer with the formal authority you will need to carry it through. That is what I am doing. Understood. Will you sign tonight? I will. Good. She poured a third cup of tea. She pushed it to him. She said, "Drink your tea." He drank his tea. The dawn light came over the eastern hills and into the room through the paper wall on the east side, and the long room slowly filled with the cold pale gold of a clear autumn morning, and the woman who had been written to die in chapter 91 of someone else's novel poured tea for the man who had been written off the page of any novel at all, and they drank in the quiet of her chambers, and the script that had been running for centuries shuddered along its length, and somewhere far to the west a 16-year-old girl named Sue Won woke from a dream she could not remember and lay in her narrow bed at the White Cloud Sect's junior dormitory looking at the ceiling without knowing why she felt that something, somewhere, had moved. Chapter 4. The Bright Sword's Answer. The Bright Sword Sect's response arrived 22 days later. It arrived in the form of a single envoy, a senior elder named Wu Run, accompanied by 12 sword disciples in formal travel robes and a sealed scroll in a lacquered box. Wu Run rode up to the hall's lower gate at the third bell of afternoon and demanded an audience with the patriarch. He got one. The audience was held in the hall's middle courtyard, in the open air, with the senior disciples of the hall arrayed in formal order behind Mei Lan, with Yin Wei standing 2 paces behind her left shoulder in his old bodyguard's posture and his new short blade at his hip. Wu Ren was 64, lean as a hunting dog, with a fringe of white beard and the slow, careful eyes of a man who had been doing politics longer than most of the people he was about to address had been alive. He bowed precisely to Mei Lan and presented the lacquered box. He said, "Patriarch of the Cold Lotus Hall, the Bright Sword Sect requires an accounting." Mei Lan accepted the box. She did not open it. She said, "Senior Wu, your sect's heir died at an inn south of Huajin 23 days ago. The note left on his chest, by the report I have received, was anonymous. Why have you come to me for an accounting?" "Because the heir was on his way to your hall, Patriarch. He had announced a duel with you. The duel did not occur because he was killed before he arrived. The party responsible for the killing is, by the careful arithmetic of who benefited from the death, your hall. The careful arithmetic of who benefited is not the same as evidence. It is not. The Bright Sword Sect, however, is not requiring evidence. We are requiring an accounting. There is a difference. The accounting is the response we receive from your hall on the matter of our heir's death. We will judge the accounting on its content." Mei Lan looked at him across the courtyard for a long count. She did not move. She said, after the count, "Senior Wu, the accounting you are requesting will be brief." The Cold Lotus Hall did not, at any point during the period in question, dispatch a party south of Huajin. The Cold Lotus Hall had no operational role in the death of your heir. The Cold Lotus Hall, however, does have a position on the matter, which I will state for the record now so that you may carry it back to your sect. The position is this. Your heir was, by the careful read of the people of this hall, an unworthy man. His master is, by the same read, an unworthy man. Your sect has, for the past 3 years, been operating in a manner that the cultivation world has noticed and that the cultivation world has chosen, for its own reasons, not yet to address. The death of your heir is, by the position of this hall, a matter we did not arrange, but a matter we are not sorry has occurred. We will not pretend to grief we do not feel. We will not, however, take responsibility for an act we did not commit. That is the accounting. Please carry it back." Wu Run went very still. The 12 sword disciples behind him registered the speech with a slow ripple of barely contained motion. Wu Run did not look at them. His pale eye stayed on Mei Lan. He said, after a long count, Patriarch, your accounting is not the accounting we required. It is the accounting I am providing. You understand the consequences of what you have just said. I understand them. The consequence is that the Bright Sword Sect will, within a season, declare formal war on the Cold Lotus Hall. The declaration will name the Hall as the responsible party for your heir's death, despite the absence of evidence, because your sect requires the war for its own internal political reasons. The war will run for some number of months. It will end when one of the two parties is sufficiently weakened that the other can dictate terms. I am informing you, today, that the party that will be sufficiently weakened will not be the Cold Lotus Hall. You may carry that information back to your sect along with the accounting. Wu Ren's white-bearded face did not change. He said, very quietly, Patriarch, you are a young woman speaking to a senior elder of the Southern Circuit's third-ranked sect. I would advise, for your own preservation, that you reconsider the tone of your accounting. I have considered the tone. The tone is the tone. Please carry it back. Wu Ren bowed precisely. He said, the Bright Sword Sect will respond in season. I will expect the response. Wu Ren turned and mounted his horse and rode out of the hall's lower gate with his 12 disciples behind him. The courtyard remained silent for a count of perhaps 90 seconds after the gate closed. Then Bo Yang, 2 paces behind Mei Lan's right shoulder, said in a quiet voice that did not carry past the inner circle of senior disciples. Patriarch, that was, by my honest assessment of what just happened, the cleanest declaration of war I have ever heard a senior elder receive. Mei Lan did not turn. She said, in the same quiet voice, thank you, Bo Yang. Disperse the disciples. Senior council in the upper chambers at the 7th bell. Yin Wei with me. She walked into the corridor. Yin Wei walked behind her. When the corridor's door closed behind them, she stopped, set the lacquered box on a side table, leaned her shoulder against the wall, and pressed both palms flat to her face. She breathed for a long count behind her palms. When she lowered her hands, her gray eyes were dry, but the muscle along her jaw was taut. She said, I have wanted, for 7 years, to say that to a senior elder of any sect that had been carrying our girl's hair on their belts. You said it. I said it. I would not have said it 3 months ago. I have, in the past 3 weeks since you signed the writ, been operating with a different set of options. The options include the option to say what I have, for 7 years, been swallowing. I am, Yin Wei, finding the options useful. He looked at her in the dim corridor. He said, the war will come. It will come. We have until the end of the season at most. Probably less. The Bright Sword Sect will declare within 40 days. They will move on the Hall within 60. The Cold Lotus Hall cannot, by its own internal arithmetic, win an open war with the Bright Sword Sect. The Sect has perhaps 4 times our operational strength. The Sect has, in addition, 2 formal alliances with mid-tier sects that will support them. We do not have any formal alliances. We are going to acquire some. Yes, we are going to acquire some. I am, Yin Wei, going to need your operational mind for the acquisition. The Hall's traditional allies are not going to be useful. The sects we have been on good terms with for the past 7 years are the wrong sects for this war. We need different allies. We need them quickly. We need them on terms that do not, in the long run, compromise the Hall's position. Can you, in the next 40 days, identify and acquire 2 such allies? He thought about the novel. He thought about the novel's geography, its sects, its political map, its careful enumeration across the early chapters of which sects had been on the wrong side of which historical grievances. The novel had spent 11 chapters of its early run on the politics of the Southern Circuit. He had read those chapters on a flight across the Atlantic. He had been bored. He had paid attention anyway because the author had been competent at world building. He said, yes, I can. The first ally will be the Frost River Pavilion, which has been at odds with the Bright Sword Sect for 16 years over a water rights dispute the Sect has consistently refused to settle. The second will be the Iron Crane Hall, which lost its previous patriarch in an unrelated matter that the Bright Sword Sect was peripherally involved in, and that the Iron Crane Hall has, for 9 years, been quietly waiting for an excuse to revenge. Both halls are, by the careful map I am carrying, willing to ally with the Cold Lotus Hall if we approach them with the right terms. The right terms will require us to make small specific concessions on territory and ceremony. I will draft the concession packages tonight and present them to you at the 7th Bell Council. If you approve, I will ride to the Frost River Pavilion within the week. She nodded. She said, "Do it." She turned and walked toward her chambers. He watched her go. He stood in the dim corridor for a long count after the door closed behind her. He registered, in the part of himself that had been a killer for 19 years and was, despite everything, still the same instrument in a different sheath, that he had just used the phrase small specific concessions without thinking, and that he was going to need to break the habit because he had picked it up in his previous life from a senior handler in Belgrade, who had used it in every briefing and whose verbal tics he had absorbed across 4 years of working under him. The phrase had been useful then. The phrase was operational shorthand in his previous profession. It was not, in this body, in this woman's hall, in this script he was breaking, the language he wanted to keep. He cut the phrase out. He turned and went to draft the concession packages. The packages, when he wrote them that evening, did not contain the phrase. None of his drafts in this life would. Chapter 5. Frost River. The Frost River Pavilion sat 11 days' ride west, on a wide loop of the river that gave the pavilion its name. Yenwei rode with Bo Yang and a single junior disciple as banner-bearer. Mei Lan stayed at the hall to fortify the gates and finish the formal alliance documents that Yenwei was carrying in a sealed satchel under his cloak. They reached the pavilion at sundown on the 11th day. The pavilion's patriarch was a woman in her late 40s named Hanyu. She had inherited the seat from her mother and ran it the way her mother had run it, with a careful coldness, a long memory for grievances, and a habit of letting visitors wait in the outer hall for hours before granting an audience. Yenwei did not wait. He sent the banner-bearer in with a folded note. The note had been written by Mei Lan in her own hand. It said, in 8 characters, 16 years of water. The debt may be paid. Hanyu's senior steward came out for Yenwei 7 minutes after the note went in. The audience was held in a small inner office that smelled of cedar oil. Hanyu sat behind a low desk in a robe the color of river fog. She did not invite Yenwei to sit. She held the note in one hand and looked at him over the top of it. She said, "The Cold Lotus Hall is offering to pay the water debt. On the patriarch's behalf, yes. The debt is not yours to pay. It is not. It is the Bright Sword Sect's. The Cold Lotus Hall is offering to make the Sect pay it." Hanyu set the note down. Her face did not change, but the muscle under her jaw worked once. She said how. He explained. He told her that the Bright Sword Sect had, 3 weeks ago, lost its heir. He told her that the Sect would, within a season, declare formal war on the Cold Lotus Hall. He told her that the Hall did not have the strength to fight the Sect alone, but did have, in its hand, the leverage of the heir's death, a death the Sect could not publicly explain without exposing the unworthiness of the heir's master, and that the Sect would therefore pursue with a noise that did not match its operational competence. He told Hanyu that the Cold Lotus Hall was offering the Frost River Pavilion a precise role in the coming war. The role was as follows. The pavilion would not, at any point during the war, openly ally with the Cold Lotus Hall. The pavilion would, however, on 3 specific dates during the war's expected 6-month run, conduct unrelated water rights enforcement actions against 3 of the Bright Sword Sect's downstream holdings. The actions would, by the pavilion's accumulated legal precedent, be entirely defensible in the imperial court. The actions would also, in operational reality, Deny the sect access to the 3 water sources its main campaigns depended on. The sect's campaigns against the Cold Lotus Hall would, without water, collapse within weeks. The pavilion would, in exchange, receive at the end of the war the formal cession of 2 of the 3 downstream holdings, the 2 whose water rights the pavilion had been disputing for 16 years. The third would be returned to the sect as a face-saving gesture. Hanyu listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a long count. She said, "The offer is well constructed. It assumes my pavilion can manage 3 enforcement actions in 6 months without exposing the coordination. The assumption is correct, but only barely. I would want, in addition to the 2 downstream holdings, the formal acknowledgement from the Cold Lotus Hall that the water debt has been paid in full. The acknowledgement would close the matter of the 16 years. My pavilion would, going forward, have no further claim on the sect on this question." "Acceptable. One further item." "Name it." "You. The man making me this offer. I have not met you before today. The Cold Lotus Hall's bodyguard, by my pavilion's intelligence on the hall, has been a silent man for 4 years. The man across this desk is not silent. He is, in fact, the most operationally clear envoy I have received from any sect in 11 years. I would like to know who I am dealing with." He met her eyes across the desk. He said, "Steward of the Cold Lotus Hall. The Patriarch signed the writ a month ago. The role is internal. The role is being used, today, on this errand. You are the third party outside the hall to learn of it. The first 2 are the senior elder of the Bright Sword Sect, who has not yet been formally informed but will infer it within the season, and Bo Yang, who is waiting in your outer hall and who has been in the hall's senior council since I signed the writ. The pavilion will, by my preference and the Patriarch's, keep the information to itself until the war is over." "The Patriarch made you steward?" "Yes." 4 years of silence, and then steward. The silence broke. The Patriarch determined the broken silence was useful. "You are useful." "I am, by my own assessment, useful. The Patriarch and I disagree on most personal questions. We agree on operational ones." Hanyu studied him for a long count. The cedar oil smell of the small office settled between them. Outside the window, the river ran cold and gray in the evening light, and somewhere down by the dock a pavilion disciple was singing a low river song to herself in a clear voice that carried up through the still air. Hanyu said, "Finally, the Frost River Pavilion accepts the alliance. I will sign the documents tonight. My senior steward will work out the operational details with you in the morning. Bo Yang will be welcome to dinner. You will be welcome also. I would prefer, over the dinner, to have one further conversation with you about a matter that is not, strictly, about the war." "What matter?" "My daughter." He looked at her. She held his eyes for a long count. She said, "My daughter is 24. She has been the pavilion's senior cultivator for 3 years. She is, by my honest assessment of her, which I do not give lightly, the operator who will inherit this pavilion. She has been waiting to inherit for some time. The waiting has not been good for her. She has been, in the past 2 years, looking for the kind of operational outlet that the pavilion's normal business does not provide. I have not been able to offer her one. The war you are proposing will offer her one. I would like, at dinner, to introduce her to you and to the operational role I expect she will want to take. Will you accept the introduction?" "I will." "Understood." Hanyu signed the documents an hour later. Yin Wei went to dinner. The daughter's name was Jiao. She was small and quick, with her mother's pale eyes and a smile that did not appear often but landed with weight when it did. She had been listening to the negotiation from the next room through a panel her mother had installed for the purpose. She knew the deal before she sat down to dinner. She said, across her bowl of clear soup, in a voice that did not perform anything, "Steward Yin, I will be the operational liaison for the pavilion's 3 actions. I will need to coordinate with someone in your hall who can manage the timing on your end. I do not, by my own preference, want a courier. I want a partner. The actions will succeed or fail on the precision of the coordination. I am proposing to ride back with you tomorrow to the Cold Lotus Hall and to spend the next month at the hall planning the coordination directly with whoever your patriarch designates. After the month, I will return to my pavilion to execute. Will the patriarch accept the arrangement? Yanwei looked at her across the table. He said, "The patriarch will accept the arrangement. The coordination on my end will be me. You will work with me directly." Good. One question. Ask. Your mother said you have been waiting to inherit and that the waiting has not been good for you. Are you proposing this arrangement because the war is the operational outlet you have been looking for, or because the arrangement is the operational outlet? She set her spoon down. She looked at him across the small table with a quality of attention that her mother, watching from her own seat at the head of the table, registered with a small lift of one eyebrow. Zhao said both. The war is the outlet I have been looking for. The arrangement is the form the outlet has taken. The two are not separable. I am, steward, being direct with you because I have not, in the past 3 years, met a partner in any operational role who would, by my own assessment, match the kind of work I want to do. You are the first. I am proposing the arrangement because I want to find out whether the impression I have formed in this dinner is accurate. He looked at her in the lamplight. He said, "The impression you have formed is that you are the first operator I have spoken with whose mind moves at the speed mine does. I would like to find out if I am right. The war will give me, and you, a great deal of opportunity to find out." He drank from his cup of clear water. He said, "We will find out." Zhao smiled. It was the smile her mother had warned him would land with weight when it landed. It did. Han Yu, watching from the head of the table, did not say anything. The dinner finished at the second bell. Yanwei and Bo Yang and Zhao rode east at first light. Chapter 6. Iron Crane. The Iron Crane Hall was easier. The hall's patriarch, a man in his late 50s named Lu Heng, who had inherited the seat after his predecessor's unexplained death 9 years earlier, received Yanwei in a single audience that lasted 40 minutes. Lu Heng listened to the offer, asked 3 questions, accepted the terms, and signed the documents on the spot. The alliance was not a formal one. The Iron Crane Hall would not, in public, support the Cold Lotus Hall against the Bright Sword Sect. The Iron Crane Hall would, however, on 2 precise dates during the war, conduct training maneuvers on the eastern border that the Bright Sword Sect's eastern flank would be forced to respond to with troop redirections. The training maneuvers would not commit Iron Crane forces to combat. They would tie up Bright Sword forces that could not otherwise be tied up. In exchange, the Iron Crane Hall would, at the war's end, receive a sealed document signed by Mei Lan that named the Bright Sword Sect's senior elder responsible for the death of Lu Heng's predecessor 9 years earlier. The document was a piece of intelligence Mei Lan had been holding since she had inherited the hall, and which she had never had the operational opportunity to use. It would, in Lu Heng's hands, give him the formal grounds to revenge his predecessor's death after the war's end. Lu Heng would use it. The Bright Sword Sect would, by the post-war year, lose 2 senior elders to a chain of revenge killings that the imperial court would deem entirely defensible under the cultivation world's traditional laws. Yanwei rode out of the Iron Crane Hall on the 4th day. He rode east with Bo Yang and the banner-bearer. He reached the Cold Lotus Hall on the 16th day after Han Yu's signing. Mei Lan met him at the upper courtyard. Zhao had arrived 3 days earlier with her mother's escort. She had been working with the hall's senior council on the operational coordination of the pavilion's 3 actions. The plans were 60% complete. Mei Lan, at the upper courtyard, said, "Both alliances are sealed." Both. The pavilion's daughter is operationally sound. She will be back at the pavilion within the month. The coordination with her will run through me for the duration of the war. You are going to be busy. I am going to be busy. So are you. She looked at him in the late afternoon sun. She said, very quietly, "Yanwei. Mei Lan. The war begins in 11 days. The Bright Sword Sect's formal declaration will arrive at our gate at the 3rd bell of the morning of the 12th day from now. I have already drafted my response. The response will be sent within an hour of receipt. The war will, by every measure of operational planning, run for 6 months. I have, in the past 16 days while you were riding, been preparing the hall for those 6 months. I have been doing it alone because the senior council needed to see me doing it alone in order to absorb that I am going to lead the hall through the war myself. You are. I am. You will lead the operational side. I will lead the institutional side. The senior council will see both leaders. The disciples will see one. The world outside the hall will see one. The arrangement we made in my chambers 3 weeks ago is now operationally live. I am informing you so you may begin operating at the level the writ entitles you to. He nodded. He said, understood. One further thing. Yes. She looked at him for a count of perhaps 10 seconds. She said, the second reason you gave me 3 weeks ago, about the contract you have wanted to take for 19 years. I have, in the 16 days since you left, thought about it some. I have decided I owe you, in return, an honest piece of my own internal state. I am going to give it to you now. It will be brief. You will not respond to it. We will continue to operate as we have been operating. The piece is this. I have, in the 4 years you have been my bodyguard, registered you as a piece of operational equipment. I have not, in those 4 years, looked at you as a person. I am not, in this hour, going to claim that I now look at you as a person in the manner that produces the kind of attachment that interferes with operational work. I am going to claim that I have, in the past 3 weeks since you signed the writ, begun to look at you as a person whose presence in this hall is no longer the presence of equipment. That is all I am going to claim. I am informing you so you may calibrate, in your own operational planning, for the fact that the patriarch you are serving is, going forward, going to be reading you differently than she has read you for 4 years. He stood very still in the late afternoon sun. He said, Mei Lan, Yinwei, thank you for the information. You are welcome. I have, in the past 3 weeks since signing the writ, been reading you differently than I read you for the 4 years prior. I am informing you in return. She held his eyes for a long count. She said, we are calibrated. We are. Go and find Bo Yang. The senior council convenes at the 7th bell. You will brief them on both alliances. Jiao will brief them on the pavilion's operational plans. I will brief them on the hall's institutional posture. The council will, by the end of the briefing, understand the configuration we are entering. They will. She turned and walked into the corridor. He watched her go. He stood in the late afternoon sun on the upper courtyard for a long count after the door closed behind her, and then he turned and went to find Bo Yang. Chapter 7. The Heroine at 16. The White Cloud Sect's western prefecture sat 30 days' ride west of the Cold Lotus Hall. Yinwei did not ride to it. He had considered it. He had considered, in the small hours after his conversation with Mei Lan in her chambers, riding west alone and killing Su Wan in her dormitory before the senior elder gave her the sword. He had considered it for 3 nights in a row. He had not, in the end, decided to do it. The reasons were not sentimental. The reasons were operational. Su Wan was, in the novel's geography, 16 years old at the moment Yinwei woke in Yinwei's body. She was not yet the heroine. She was a junior disciple at the White Cloud Sect with an unusual cultivation talent that the sect had not yet identified. The path that turned her into the heroine ran through a precise sequence of events the novel had described in 11 chapters. The events depended on the senior elder presenting her with the sword in 3 months. They depended further on a particular encounter the elder had with Su Wan after the sword was presented. They depended further on Su Wan choosing, of her own accord, to leave the White Cloud Sect on a particular mission. If any of the 3 steps did not occur, the path did not begin. Yinwei could disrupt any of the 3 steps without killing her. He chose to disrupt the first. He wrote a letter. The letter was addressed to the senior elder of the White Cloud Sect, a woman named Bai Yin. He had pulled her name out of his memory of the novel's Chapter 31, which had given a brief description of her cultivation lineage and her political position within the sect. Bai Yin was 68, the third-ranked elder of the sect, and had been waiting 20 years for the first-ranked elder to die, so she could take the senior seat. The first-ranked elder had not yet died. He was 81 and in excellent health. Bai Yin, by the novel's brief sketch, had been quietly placing her own protégés in positions across the sect for the past decade. Suwon was one of those protégés. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It said, without preamble, that the Cold Lotus Hall Senior Council had identified, by means it would not disclose, that the White Cloud Sect's third-ranked elder was planning to present a particular junior disciple with a particular sword in approximately 90 days. The Cold Lotus Hall had no operational interest in the disciple. The Cold Lotus Hall had, however, an institutional interest in ensuring that the sword in question, which the letter named by its proper inventory designation, a designation only a senior White Cloud elder would recognize, was not given to any disciple at this time. The Cold Lotus Hall was therefore informing the third-ranked elder of 2 pieces of operational information. The first was that the disciple in question had been identified by an unnamed but credible source as a covert agent of the first-ranked elder's faction. The second was that the presentation of the sword to such a disciple would, in the political environment of the sect, be read as the third-ranked elder strengthening the first-ranked elder's faction at her own expense. The letter closed with the polite note that the Cold Lotus Hall did not, in providing this information, expect any reciprocal favor. He sealed the letter with the Hall's seal. He sent it by the Hall's fastest courier. The letter reached the White Cloud Sect in 18 days. Bai Yin read it twice in her private office. She believed it. She believed it because the letter contained the sword's inventory designation, which only a senior elder could know, and because the letter's claim about Suwon being a covert agent of the first-ranked elder's faction confirmed a paranoia Bai Yin had been carrying about that faction for years. Bai Yin did not present the sword. She did not, instead, harm Suwon. She did not have any operational reason to harm Suwon. She simply, at the meeting at which the presentation had been scheduled, declined to make the presentation. She told her junior staff that the sword would remain in the sect's vault for the indefinite future. She reassigned Suwon to a quiet administrative role in the sect's secondary library. Suwon was 16. She did not know that she had been quietly removed from a path that would have made her the heroine of a war. She continued her daily training at the sect. She continued her quiet life. She made friends in the library. She fell, the following year, into a comfortable companionship with a junior librarian named Mu Jin. They would, in the years that followed, live a long, quiet life together in the secondary library. Suwon would never know that she had been written, in another world, as the empress of an empire. She would die at 81 of a peaceful illness, with Mu Jin at her side, in the small house the sect had given them in the Western Quarter after their formal retirement at 60. The path had been disrupted. Yin Wei did not know, in the months that followed his sending of the letter, whether the disruption had taken. He had no way to verify it from the Cold Lotus Hall. He simply, in the small operational ledger he kept in his head, registered the action as taken and moved on to the war. The war, when it came, would prove the disruption had taken, because no heroine arrived. Part 2. The War. Chapter 8. The First Engagement. The Bright Sword Sect's formal declaration arrived on the morning of the 12th day, exactly on the schedule Mei Lan had projected. The declaration was read aloud at the hall's lower gate by a junior envoy who had been sent for that purpose and who departed within 10 minutes of finishing the reading. The hall's response, Mei Lan's draft, signed and sealed 2 hours before the envoy's arrival, was handed to him as he mounted his horse. The first engagement occurred 41 days later. It was not at the hall. It was at a small tradeway station called Plum Crossing, 60 miles south of the Hall, where the Cold Lotus Hall maintained a contingent of 9 senior disciples whose role was to guard the Hall's southern trade routes. The Bright Sword Sect's expeditionary force, 300 sword disciples under a senior elder named Wu Cheng, the cousin of the elder who had visited the Hall, approached Plum Crossing at dawn with the intention of taking the way station and using it as a forward camp. The 9 senior disciples were not at the way station. They had been evacuated 2 days earlier on Yin Wei's order. The way station had been left in the hands of 3 local hired men whose role was to greet the Bright Sword force, surrender the way station without resistance, and deliver a sealed letter to Wu Cheng. The letter was 4 lines. It said, "The way station is yours. The water in the well has been treated. The treatment is not lethal. The treatment will, within 6 hours of drinking, produce a fever and a confusion that will render any cultivator who has drunk the water operationally compromised for approximately 3 days. The treatment cannot be detected by any of the standard methods of testing well water for poison. The treatment is in the well because the Cold Lotus Hall is informing you that we have, at our disposal, treatments of this kind that we are willing to use against any forward position your forces occupy for the duration of the war. The well in question is the only well at Plum Crossing. Your forces will be thirsty. The Cold Lotus Hall is not formally responsible for what your forces choose to do about it." Wu Cheng read the letter twice in the way station's central courtyard. He looked at the well. He had 300 men. He had 2 days of rations for those men. The next reliable water source on the route to the Hall was 40 miles further north. He could send a forward detachment to the next source, leave a holding force at the way station, and wait for the forward detachment to confirm the water there was clean. The maneuver would cost him 3 days and would expose his forward detachment to the kind of small operational harassment that the Cold Lotus Hall's letter had implied would continue at every position. He could also, by the alternative, drink the water and gamble the letter was a bluff. He chose the third option, which was to immediately withdraw the entire expeditionary force back to the Bright Sword Sect's southern staging compound, refill on water and rations there, and conduct the rest of the campaign by careful overland supply rather than by the live-off-the-land doctrine the Sect had used for the past 3 years. The choice cost him 11 days. The 11 days were the first 11 days of the operational opening Yin Wei had designed the well at Plum Crossing to create. In those 11 days, the Frost River Pavilion conducted its first water rights enforcement action against the Sect's downstream holdings at the village of 2 Pines. The action denied the Sect's secondary campaign, which had been moving north on a different route under a different elder, access to the water its march had depended on. The secondary campaign halted. The elder commanding it sent an urgent letter to the Bright Sword Sect's main compound requesting reinforcement and water support. The main compound, in those same 11 days, was learning that the primary expeditionary force had withdrawn from Plum Crossing. The compound's senior elders met in emergency council on the 9th day. The council debated for 3 days. By the end of the debate, the Sect's strategic position had visibly degraded. They had lost the initiative. They had committed 2 campaigns that were both stalled for reasons they had not anticipated, and they had begun to receive small reports from their eastern flank that the Iron Crane Hall was conducting unrelated training maneuvers in a manner that would, if continued, force the Sect to redirect its eastern reserves. The Sect did not yet know about the Iron Crane Hall's role. It would not learn for another 2 months. By then it would be too late. The Cold Lotus Hall, in those same days, was moving operationally on 3 fronts. The first was the small operational harassment that the Plum Crossing letter had promised. Yin Wei had designed 11 such operations across the southern trade routes, each calibrated to deny the Bright Sword Force a specific resource at a specific time. The operations did not require senior disciples. They required local hired men and a small operational fund. The fund had been set up by Mei Lan 3 weeks before the war began. The second front was the formal diplomatic correspondence Mei Lan was conducting with the other mid-tier sects in the Southern Circuit. The correspondence was not asking for alliances. The correspondence was simply keeping the other sects informed, in formal and polite language, about the war's progress as the Cold Lotus Hall saw it. The correspondence had the effect of slowly shifting the Southern Circuit's diplomatic red of the war, from the assumption the Cold Lotus Hall would be crushed within months to the assumption the sect had badly miscalculated. The shift would, by the war's third month, produce informal expressions of sympathy from 4 mid-tier sects that had previously been neutral. The expressions of sympathy would not become formal alliances. They would, however, make the Bright Sword sect's effort to recruit auxiliary support from those 4 sects entirely impossible. The third front was Yin Wei himself. He took to the field at the end of the second month. He did not lead troops. He did not appear in any of the formal engagements. He moved as a single operator across the war's southern theater with a small team of 3 senior disciples whose discretion he had assessed personally. The team conducted 9 separate operations across 4 months. The operations were the kind of work he had been doing for 19 years in his previous life. They were night work, knife work, the careful removal of operational nodes the Bright Sword sect could not afford to lose. By the war's 4th month, the sect had lost 2 senior elders, 3 campaign quartermasters, and 7 mid-rank field officers. None of the deaths could be formally attributed to the Cold Lotus Hall. The sect knew anyway. The sect could not, however, retaliate in kind, because the sect did not have an operator of Yin Wei's caliber in its own roster, and because the Cold Lotus Hall's institutional posture during the war, Mei Lan's formal correspondence, her public restraint, her careful and visible commitment to the conventional methods of cultivation world conflict, gave the sect no formal target against which to retaliate. By the war's 5th month, the Bright Sword Sect Senior Council was meeting in emergency session 3 times a week. By the 6th month, the sect's senior elders had concluded, privately and against their own initial intention, that the war was not winnable on the terms they had declared it under. The sect sued for peace at the end of the 6th month. The peace terms were negotiated by Mei Lan personally in a 6-day session at a neutral monastery midway between the hall and the sect. Yin Wei was present at the session as her steward. The terms were finalized on the 6th day. The terms were as follows. The Bright Sword sect formally withdrew its accusation that the Cold Lotus Hall had been responsible for the death of Chen Yuan. The sect formally acknowledged that the death had been the result of an unknown party whose identity could not be established. The sect formally apologized to the Cold Lotus Hall for the war's launch, which the sect described as the result of inadequate information. The sect ceded, in formal documents, the 2 downstream holdings the Frost River Pavilion had been disputing for 16 years. The session was framed as an unrelated matter that the sect had decided to settle in the interest of regional stability. The sect transferred, by a separate sealed document, the senior elder whose unworthy conduct had been the original cause of the dispute over Chen Yuan's master. The transfer was to a remote monastery in the northern prefecture, where the elder would live out his remaining years in retirement and would not, under the terms of the agreement, be permitted to return to the sect's main compound. The transfer was the sect's face-saving substitute for the formal punishment Mei Lan had originally proposed, which was the elder's expulsion from the sect entirely. The sect agreed, finally, to a 5-year non-aggression pact with the Cold Lotus Hall. The pact would, by the time it expired, have outlived its strategic value. The sect's senior leadership would, by that point, have largely turned over. The new leadership would have no appetite for a renewed conflict with a hall that had so visibly outmaneuvered the sect across 6 months. The pact would, in effect, become permanent. Mei Lan signed the terms at the 7th bell of the 6th day. The sect's senior elders signed at the same bell. The war was over. The Cold Lotus Hall, by the careful arithmetic Yin Wei kept in his head, had won every operational objective it had set at the war's beginning, had acquired 2 formal allies and the informal sympathy of 4 other sects, had ceded nothing, had lost 6 senior disciples and 11 juniors to engagements across the 6 months, and had emerged with its institutional standing in the Southern Circuit higher than it had been at any point in the Hall's previous 70 years. Mei Lan, at the end of the signing, sat in the small monastery cell that had been her quarters for the 6 days of negotiation. Yanwei was with her. The cell was lit by a single oil lamp. A pot of cooling tea sat between them on the floor. She said, "The war is over. It is over. We have, in 6 months, become the 3rd-ranked hall of the Southern Circuit. We have." The heroine never arrived. She did not. The letter took. You have not, in the 6 months, mentioned her. I had no operational reason to mention her. The letter took. The disruption held. She is, by my best estimate of where she is now, working in the secondary library of the White Cloud Sect's Western Prefecture. She will live there for the rest of her natural life. She will never know what she would have been. Mei Lan looked at the lamp for a long count. She said, "Is that, Yanwei, a worse outcome for her than the one the novel had written?" No. The novel had her dying at 32 of a slow poisoning by a court official during her 2nd year as empress. The poisoning was never identified. The novel's epilogue described it as a peaceful death attributed to overwork. The death was not peaceful. The novel's author had been polite to a heroine whose end she had not wanted to describe in detail. By the novel's actual arithmetic, Suwon would have died in 16 years from now after a deeply unhappy reign. By the disruption, she will live to 81 in a quiet companionship that the novel did not write, but that her own choices, in the absence of the path, have produced for her. The outcome is better. You are confident. I am. Good. She drank from her cup. She said, "The script has been broken. It has been broken. The world has been moved off the page. Whatever this world is, story, structure, scripted simulation, or simply a place that happens to resemble a novel I once read, it is now operating in territory the novel does not cover. We are, going forward, in unwritten country. I do not know what that means for the long term. I would, by my honest read, expect surprises. The author who wrote the novel, if she exists in some configuration I cannot reach, will not be writing the next chapter for us. We will write it. You will. The hall is yours. I am, by the writ, the steward. The hand on the pen is yours. The hand on the sword is mine." She looked at him across the lamp. She said, very quietly, "Both of those hands are mine, Yanwei." He met her eyes. He said, "Both of them are." She did not move from her cushion. She did not need to. The lamp burned between them for a long count. Outside the cell, in the dark monastery courtyard, the monastery's old bell rang once to mark the 2nd bell of morning. A small breeze moved through the courtyard. The breeze carried the smell of pine. Neither of them spoke. When the next bell rang, Mei Lan rose. She walked around the lamp. She held out her hand. Yanwei took it. She did not pull him up. She held his hand for a long count, in the small cold cell, with the lamp burning low between their feet. She said, when the count had run, "Come." He stood. He went with her. The lamp went out behind them. Chapter 9. The Question. 2 months after the war's end, on a clear cold morning in the 11th month of the year, Yanwei walked into Mei Lan's chambers with the 7th cup of tea she had ordered since the 7th bell, set it on her writing table, and asked her the question he had been holding since the night at the monastery. He said, "Mei Lan, what do you want the empire to look like when you are finished with it?" She did not look up from the document she was reading. She said, "That is not a small question to ask before breakfast. You have not eaten breakfast in 9 days. The question stays." She set the document down. She picked up the tea. She held the cup in both hands. The steam came up between her face and his across the writing table. She said, "You are asking whether the hall stops here, or whether the hall is the first step of something larger." Yes. You have a preference. I do. The preference is yours to override. I would, by my own reading of the past 6 months, prefer the second option. The Southern Circuit has, in the past month, registered the Cold Lotus Hall as a power capable of operating against larger sects and winning. The registration is going to attract attention. The attention will come whether or not you want it. You will, in the next year, receive overtures from the imperial court, from at least 3 first-rank sects in the other prefectures, and from a small number of regional powers I have not yet enumerated. The overtures will either move you forward or pin you in place. The forward option requires that you have an answer to my question. The pinned option requires nothing and produces a hall that, by the careful arithmetic of Southern Circuit politics, will be consumed within 8 years by whichever first-rank sect grows tired of waiting for you to commit. You are saying the choice is between expansion and consumption. I am saying that the choice you made when you signed the writ has, by its actual operational consequences, narrowed your options to those two. There is no version of the hall going forward that returns to the quiet defensive posture you held for 7 years before the writ. The posture was sustainable only because the Southern Circuit had not yet registered what the hall actually was. The registration has happened. The posture is no longer available. You are now committed, by what we have done, to either growing or being eaten. I am asking which. She drank her tea. She set the cup down. She said, very quietly, growing. To what? She did not answer immediately. She looked out through the paper wall on the east side of the chamber at the river below, which was running gray and slow in the cold morning light, and at the small herd of cranes that lived on the river's eastern bank and that were, at this hour, standing in the shallows with the patient attention of birds who had nothing to do until the small fish in the reeds moved. She said, after a long count, I have, in 7 years of running this hall, watched the Southern Circuit do specific things to specific people that the imperial court has chosen, year after year, to ignore. I have watched the Bright Sword sect collect the hair of murdered children for their fans. I have watched the Eagle Mountain Hall sell its junior disciples as concubines to court officials in exchange for tax exemptions. I have watched the imperial court, in formal session, decline to investigate any of it because the sects in question have purchased the silence of the relevant officials. I have, in those 7 years, accepted the imperial court's silence as the structure I was operating inside of. I have not, until you asked me this question, allowed myself to ask whether the structure could be changed. The answer is that the structure can be changed. The change requires that the Southern Circuit's first-rank sects be replaced, and that the imperial court senior officials whose silence has been purchased be replaced, and that the laws of the empire that have been written to protect the sect's worst practices be replaced. The replacement is, by every measure of what I have seen, the work of perhaps 20 years. I am 31 years old. I will be 51 when the work is finished, if it is finished. I have, in my own internal arithmetic, decided that the work is worth 20 years. I am asking whether you are willing to do the 20 years with me. He looked at her across the writing table. He said, yes. You have not asked what role I am offering you. You are offering me whatever role the work requires. I am accepting whatever role the work requires. The specifics will be worked out as we go. She studied him in the cold morning light. She said, you are an unusual man, Yinwei. I am, in this body, in this hall, in this configuration, the man you have made me. The unusualness is not native. It is the result of your having signed the writ and of the work since. The work since. Yes. She set the cup down. She rose from her cushion. She walked around the writing table and stood at his shoulder for a long count, with her right hand resting very lightly on the back of his neck below the collar of his robe. She said, very quietly, the work since has, in the past 2 months, included a configuration I had not expected to have at 31. I am aware. I had not, in the 7 years before the writ, allowed myself to expect any such configuration. I am aware. I am going to keep it. Keep it. As part of the 20 years. As part of the work. As part of the hall going forward. I am informing you so you may begin operating, from this morning, with the understanding that the configuration is not, by my reading of it, a passing piece of the post-war recovery. It is the structure we are going to keep for the duration. He sat very still in his cushion. He said, Mei Lan, Yinwei, I have spent 19 years of my previous life and 20 months of this one without any such configuration. I had not, in either of those periods, allowed myself to expect one. I am informing you in return that the configuration is, from my side, going to be kept for the duration. She did not move her hand. She said, after a long count, Good, good. She lifted her hand. She walked back around the writing table. She sat down on her cushion. She picked up the next document from the stack. She said, in the voice she used when the work was resuming, The imperial court overtures will begin within the year. We will need to prepare a posture before they arrive. The posture should be the posture of a hall that is willing to engage with the court, but that is not willing to be used by the court. I will draft the first version this afternoon. You will critique it tonight. We will have a working version by the end of the week. I will critique it tonight. Good. Now go and find Bo Yang. The pavilion's daughter will be arriving in 3 days for the next coordination meeting. The meeting will be the first one not about the war. The meeting will be about what comes after. I want her brought directly to the upper chamber when she arrives. I want her to hear the answer to the question you asked me this morning, in her own ear, in this room, before she returns to the pavilion. The Frost River Pavilion is going to be, by my decision this morning, one of the structural pieces of the next 20 years. Han, you will need to know. Jiao is the right channel. He stood up. He said, I will arrange it. Good. He walked to the door. He turned at the threshold. He said, Mei Lan, Yinwei, the next 20 years. Yes. I am looking forward to them. She did not look up from the document. She said, very quietly, so am I. He went to find Bo Yang. Chapter 10, Jiao returns. Jiao arrived at the hall on a windless cold afternoon 3 days later. She rode in through the lower gate with a single banner bearer and a horse loaded with documents. Bo Yang met her at the stable. He had been briefed by Yanwei the night before on the new framing of her visit. He bowed to her as he would bow to a senior visiting envoy, took her horse from her, and led her up the stairs to the upper chamber where Mei Lan and Yanwei were waiting. Jiao stopped at the upper chamber's door. She had spent the previous month at the pavilion. Her mother had, in those weeks, been training her on the diplomatic protocols of the upper-tier sects. The training had not been gentle. Han Yu had, by long preference, prepared her daughter for inheritance by the method of throwing the daughter into rooms the daughter was not ready for and letting her find her own footing. Jiao had developed, across the past 3 years, the kind of footing that did not need warning. She stepped into the chamber. She bowed precisely to Mei Lan. She nodded to Yanwei. She accepted the cushion that had been set for her on the writing table's third side. She said, in her clear, quick voice, Patriarch, Steward, I have come with the pavilion's full operational report from the war's enforcement actions, the pavilion's preliminary thoughts on post-war coordination, and a piece of information from my mother that she has asked me to deliver personally. Mei Lan said, Deliver. Jiao laid a folded paper on the table. She said, The imperial court has, in the past 3 weeks, dispatched an envoy to the Frost River Pavilion to inquire about the conduct of the recent war. The envoy did not ask my mother about the Brightsword Sect's actions. The envoy asked about the Cold Lotus Hall's actions. The envoy used language my mother registered as the language a court intelligence officer would use when preparing a confidential brief for a senior court official. The envoy did not, by my mother's read, intend the inquiry to be public. He intended it to be quiet. My mother answered the envoy's questions in the manner my mother answers all such questions, which is to provide the bare formal facts of the war's public record without volunteering anything. The envoy left after 2 days. My mother has, in the 3 weeks since, identified the envoy through the pavilion's intelligence as a man named Director Hu of the Imperial Court's Office of Sect Affairs. Director Hu is, by my mother's network, a senior official in the court faction associated with the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince is, by the same network, the faction of the court that has been quietly preparing for the eventual succession by acquiring informal allies among the sects of the Southern Circuit. The Crown Prince's faction has, by my mother's reading, identified the Cold Lotus Hall as a potential informal ally. The inquiry through Director Hu was the first step of an approach. Mei Lan listened without interrupting. When Jiao finished, she sat for a long count. She said, "The Crown Prince." Yes. The Crown Prince has been a quiet figure in the Imperial Court for 10 years. He is the eldest son. He is 41. His father is 63. The succession is, by every read of the court, between the Crown Prince and his younger half-brother, the Second Prince. The Second Prince has the support of 2/3 of the senior court officials, including the senior officials in the Office of Sect Affairs. The Crown Prince has the support of the remaining third plus a quiet network of provincial governors and mid-tier officials who have been preparing his case for some years. The Crown Prince's faction is the smaller faction. The faction is also, by my own reading of the past decade of court politics, the faction whose senior official has not, in the past decade, been caught accepting bribes from any of the Southern Circuit sects. The Second Prince's faction has been caught 17 times. The Second Prince's faction has, in each case, made the matter disappear before the court could investigate. The Crown Prince's faction has, in the same decade, been operating with what the pavilion's intelligence describes as an unusual level of personal restraint. Jiao said, "My mother's read is consistent with yours. The approach through Director Hu is, by my mother's read, the first step of an offer. The offer will, when it arrives in formal language, request the Cold Lotus Hall to provide informal support to the Crown Prince's faction in the matter of the succession. The support will be requested in terms that do not require the Hall to publicly commit to a side. The support will, however, require the Hall to use its newly acquired informal influence in the Southern Circuit to encourage the 4 mid-tier sects that expressed sympathy during the war to also align quietly with the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince's faction is, by my mother's read, attempting to consolidate the Southern Circuit's informal endorsement before the succession question becomes formally active. The succession will become formally active when the current emperor dies, which is, by the pavilion's medical intelligence, within the next 4 to 7 years. Mei Lan looked at Yanwei. Yanwei looked at Mei Lan. He said, "The Crown Prince is the right side of the succession. He is. The offer is the kind of offer that, if accepted, gives the Hall the imperial backing that the 20-year work I asked you about 3 days ago would require. It is. The offer will, if accepted, also commit the Hall to the kind of public role you have, for 7 years, been reluctant to take. It will." She set both palms flat on the writing table. She breathed. She said, "We will accept the offer. You are confident. I am confident. The 20-year work cannot be done without imperial backing. The Crown Prince's faction is the right side. The offer is the right form. We will accept." She turned to Jiao. She said, "Jiao, you will return to the pavilion tonight. You will tell your mother that the Cold Lotus Hall is prepared to receive the formal offer through Director Hu. You will tell her that we expect the formal offer within the next 60 days. You will tell her, finally, that the Cold Lotus Hall is prepared to coordinate, with the pavilion, the Southern Circuit's response to the offer in a manner that ensures the pavilion's interests are protected in the post-succession structure. The protection will be specified in detail in a sealed document I will draft and send to your mother within the week. Your mother and I have, by this morning's decision, become long-term partners in a piece of work that will run for approximately 20 years. I want her to know." Jiao bowed. She said, "I will tell her. One further thing." "Yes." Mei Lan looked at her across the writing table. She said, "You have, in the past 3 days of your travel here, been carrying a question of your own that you have not yet asked. Ask it now, before you ride back." Zhao's pale eyes went very still. She said, after a count, "Patriarch, the question is not, strictly, about the war or about the post-war coordination. The question is personal. The question is also about my mother. My mother has, in the past month while she was training me, registered that the pavilion's intelligence has begun to read, across several independent reports from junior agents in the hall's town, that the relationship between the patriarch of the Cold Lotus Hall and the steward of the Cold Lotus Hall has, since the war's end, taken a form that the junior agents have not been able to confidently classify. My mother is not asking the question of me as a piece of intelligence to be brought back. My mother is asking me to register, for myself, what the form is, so that I may calibrate my own relationship with the steward in the coordination work going forward. I am asking, Patriarch, directly because I will not, by my own preference, work for years with the steward on the basis of a calibration I have not openly tested." Mei Lan looked at Yanwei. Yanwei looked at Mei Lan. He said, "Your call." She said, to Zhao, "The form." "Yes. Is the form you have already inferred from your own observation. The steward and I have, since the war's end, been in the configuration of partners. The configuration is not a passing piece of the post-war recovery. It is the structure we are keeping for the duration of the 20-year work. I am informing you, now, in this chamber, with the steward present, so that you may calibrate. The calibration should include the following understanding. The configuration is not closed in the conventional sense of such configurations in the cultivation world. The steward and I have, in our own discussions, agreed that the work ahead will require partners around both of us whose proximity to us will be greater than the conventional proximity of operational allies. The proximity may, in the case of certain such partners, take forms that overlap with the configuration the steward and I share. The steward and I have, in our own agreement, accepted that overlap as the structure best suited to the kind of work we are going to do. I am informing you of the agreement because I have, in the past month, been observing your behavior toward the steward and have inferred, by my own read, that you are the kind of operator for whom the calibration in question is one you may, at some point in the next year, wish to undertake. I would prefer that you undertake it with full information rather than partial. The full information is now provided. Your call." Zhao did not move for a long count. When she spoke, her voice was low and clear. She said, "Patriarch, the full information is appreciated. I will calibrate. I will, by my honest read of myself, not need a year. I have already, in the past month at the pavilion, registered the shape of my own internal calibration on this question. The calibration is consistent with the structure you have described. I will inform my mother, in the same conversation in which I deliver your decision on the Crown Prince's offer, that the calibration has been made on this side." Yanwei looked at Zhao across the table. He said, very quietly, "Zhao, Yanwei, the work ahead will be long. The configuration is not, by my own preference, something to be entered into on the basis of a single dinner conversation in your mother's house, however much that dinner conversation may have indicated where the configuration might develop. I am proposing that the next year of coordination work between us run on its operational track without any further movement on the personal track, and that the personal track be revisited at the end of the year on the basis of what the operational year has taught us about each other. If, at that point, the calibration still holds for both of us, the configuration will be entered. If it does not hold for either, the configuration will not be entered, and we will continue as operational partners and respectful colleagues. I would prefer that the configuration not be entered on the basis of haste." Zhao looked at him. She said, 1 year. 1 year. Accepted. I would prefer it also. Good. Mei Lan watched the two of them across the writing table. She did not say anything. She had not needed to. The configuration she and Yin Wei had agreed on 2 months ago at the monastery had, in the past 5 minutes, become a configuration with a third potential partner whose entry was now scheduled, with mutual consent, for 1 year from the day. The configuration had begun to expand on its own internal logic. It would continue to expand, across the years to come, in the same manner, by the careful initiative of partners who came to the hall on their own paths and who, by the work and by the time, and by the slow, honest calibration of each side to the others, found their place in the structure Mei Lan and Yin Wei were building. By the end of the third post-war year, Zhao had entered the configuration. By the end of the fifth, the hall's senior healer, a woman named Wen Yu, who had come to the hall during the war as a junior healer attached to one of the auxiliary teams and who had, across 3 years of work in the hall's infirmary, established herself as the kind of person Mei Lan trusted to manage the hall's internal medicine, had entered the configuration as well. By the end of the seventh, the configuration included a fifth member, a former Bright Sword Sect senior disciple named Lin Yu who had defected after the war and had asked, through formal channels, for sanctuary in the Cold Lotus Hall. Lin Yu had been a senior weapons trainer in the Sect. Her defection had cost the Sect operationally. Her arrival at the hall had been one of the post-war year's largest operational gains. Across the following year of work alongside Yin Wei and Bo Yang on the hall's training regimen, Lin Yu had become, by the same careful calibration that the others had been through, the fifth. There would be no further members. The configuration had, by its own internal balance, settled at 5. The hall, across the same 7 years, had become the third-ranked hall of the Southern Circuit and was, by the end of the 7th year, formally allied with the Crown Prince's faction at the imperial court. The Crown Prince had not yet acceded. His father was still alive. The accession was, by the medical intelligence the pavilion continued to provide, perhaps 2 to 4 years away. The 20-year work had begun. Part 3. The Succession. Chapter 11. The Second Prince. The Emperor died in the 11th post-war year. He died at the age of 74, of a slow lung failure his physicians had been managing for 18 months. The death was not a surprise. The court had been preparing for it. The succession question had been openly debated in the senior council for the previous 6 months. The Crown Prince was, by formal law, the heir. The Second Prince did not accept the law. The Second Prince had spent the past 4 years preparing for the moment of his father's death. He had purchased the loyalty of 3 senior generals of the Imperial Army, the command of 2 of the 4 Palace Guard regiments, and the cooperation of the senior official of the Office of Succession Records. He had, and this was the piece Mei Lan's intelligence network had not, until 2 weeks before the Emperor's death, been able to confirm, also formed an alliance with 2 of the first-ranked sects of the Eastern Circuit who had been promised, in exchange for their support, the formal cession of the Southern Circuit's 3 most contested territories. The cession would not, by the careful map of Southern Circuit politics, be the Second Prince's to grant. It would, however, be enforceable by the Eastern sect's combined armies if the Second Prince provided the imperial cover. The Eastern sect's combined armies numbered approximately 40,000 cultivators. The Cold Lotus Hall, the Frost River Pavilion, the Iron Crane Hall, and the 4 mid-tier sects whose informal sympathy Mei Lan had cultivated over the past decade had, between them, approximately 22,000. The numbers were unfavorable. The numbers had been unfavorable from the start. Mei Lan and Yin Wei had been planning for the eventual confrontation since the 3rd post-war year. The planning had not relied on matching the Eastern sects in numbers. The planning had relied on the same principle Yin Wei had used at Plum Crossing, denying the larger force what it needed in order to convert its numbers into outcomes. The plan was 4 pieces. The first was the imperial succession itself. The Crown Prince needed to be on the throne before the Eastern sect's armies could march. If the Crown Prince was crowned and confirmed within 7 days of his father's death, The maximum window the imperial protocol allowed before the succession was formally contested in open session. The Eastern Sect's march would be an act of rebellion against a sitting emperor. The act would expose the Eastern Sects to formal military response from the imperial army's loyal regiments. The Second Prince's 3 senior generals would be confronted with the choice between supporting an open rebellion or remaining loyal. By the careful intelligence Mei Lan's network had been collecting for years, 2 of the 3 would remain loyal if the choice was forced. The third would defect and would be executed within a month. The second was the Palace Guard. The Second Prince's 2 regiments needed to be neutralized within 24 hours of the emperor's death. The neutralization could not, by political necessity, be conducted by the Crown Prince's own loyal regiments. The open confrontation would risk the kind of palace battle that would weaken the new emperor's position before he had even taken the throne. The neutralization needed to be quiet. It needed to be done by operators whose connection to the Crown Prince was deniable. The Cold Lotus Hall would provide the operators. Yanwei would lead them. The third was the Office of Succession Records. The senior official of the office, a man named Director Chow, needed to certify the Crown Prince's accession in the formal records on the morning after the emperor's death. Director Chow was the Second Prince's ally. He would, without intervention, refuse the certification on a technical pretext that would force the succession into open session. The pretext would buy the Eastern Sects the days they needed to march. Director Chow needed to be replaced by an alternative official whose certification would be accepted. The Crown Prince's faction had been quietly preparing such an alternative for 3 years. The alternative, a junior official named Yuan Lin, was the office's second most senior records keeper and was, by the long, careful work of the Crown Prince's intelligence office, both honest and loyal. Yuan Lin would, if Director Chow was removed by any means before the morning of the certification, step into the role and certify the Crown Prince's accession by the existing procedural rules. Yuan Lin had agreed to the role 2 years earlier. Director Chow would need to be removed. The fourth was the Eastern Sects themselves. The 2 sects had, by the careful arithmetic of Mei Lan's intelligence, committed approximately 70% of their combined cultivator strength to the planned march on the Southern Circuit. The 70% was to be moved by water along the central canal system to the southern staging point in the 2nd month after the emperor's death. The canal system had 2 narrow points at which a coordinated action by a small force could deny the Eastern Sects the passage they needed. The denial would not destroy the armies. The denial would, however, delay them by approximately 6 weeks. By the end of 6 weeks, the Crown Prince would have consolidated his accession to the point that the Eastern Sect's march would no longer be operationally viable. The Frost River Pavilion would manage the narrow points. Han Yu had agreed to the role for years earlier. Mei Lan and Yanwei had spent the past 4 years bringing every piece of the plan to operational readiness. The emperor died on a clear, cold night in the 3rd month of the 11th post-war year. Yanwei was at the imperial capital that night, by the operational coordination of the Crown Prince's faction, accompanied by Lin Yu and 4 senior operators of the Cold Lotus Hall. They had been in the capital for 16 days, posing as a delegation from a minor southern sect that had come to pay formal respects to the dying emperor. The cover had been arranged by the Crown Prince's intelligence office. The emperor died at the 2nd bell of morning. Yanwei moved at the 3rd bell. Chapter 12. One night at the capital. The neutralization of the Second Prince's 2 Palace Guard regiments took 4 hours. It did not involve open combat. It involved the kind of operations Yanwei had been refining since his first night in this body at the inn south of Huajin. Knife work, sleeping rooms, no witnesses, careful note placement. He and Lin Yu and the 4 senior operators worked in pairs across the 4 hours, moving through the barracks of the 2 regiments by the routes the Crown Prince's intelligence office had mapped in advance, and they removed the regiment's senior officers in their beds. 17 officers across 2 regiments. By the time the regiment's surviving junior officers convened in emergency morning meetings at the fifth bell to determine the regiment's response to the emperor's death, the regiments had no senior officers to direct them, and the notes Yin Wei had left on each dead officer's chest, short notes in a hand that did not match anyone's, naming the Eastern Sect's alliance with the Second Prince and the planned march on the Southern Circuit, were already circulating among the junior officers as the operational basis for whatever choices the junior officers would make. The junior officers made the predictable choice. They mutinied against the Second Prince's faction by the seventh bell. By noon they had declared their regiments loyal to the Crown Prince. The Second Prince had lost his palace guard. The Crown Prince's faction had not, in any formal way, been involved. Director Chow of the Office of Succession Records died at the sixth bell of the same morning, alone in his bed, of what his household staff described as a sudden seizure. The death was certified by a physician on the Crown Prince's quiet payroll. Yuan Lin assumed the office's senior role at the seventh bell by the existing procedural rules and certified the Crown Prince's accession to the throne by the eighth. By noon, the imperial capital was officially under a new emperor. The Second Prince's 3 senior generals received the news at their respective army camps across the Central Plains by sundown. 2 of them, as Mei Lan's intelligence had projected, declared their loyalty to the new emperor by the evening of the next day. The third, General Pei, the youngest and the most committed to the Second Prince's cause, refused to declare and began moving his forces toward the capital. He was intercepted by a loyal regiment under the Crown Prince's appointed senior commander on the 4th day after the emperor's death in the small hills west of the capital and was killed in the engagement. The Second Prince himself surrendered to the new emperor at the imperial palace on the 5th day. He was placed under formal house arrest at the Eastern Villa, which was the traditional residence of imperial princes whose claims had been displaced. The Eastern sects, watching the events unfold across the 7 days of the succession window, did not march. They had been waiting for the Second Prince's signal. The signal had not come. By the time their senior councils met to consider whether to march without the signal, the Crown Prince's accession was a sealed legal fact. The imperial regiments had unified under the new emperor's command, and the Frost River Pavilion had quietly begun the actions at the canal's 2 narrow points that would have stopped them in any case. The sects elected to abandon the plan. They had been careful to keep the alliance with the Second Prince informal. There was no formal evidence of the alliance. The sects denied it. The new emperor's intelligence office, by careful agreement with the Cold Lotus Hall, did not press the denial. The denial was permitted to stand. The 2 eastern sects would, in the years that followed, be reduced in operational capacity by a slow, careful sequence of regulatory and tax actions the new emperor would conduct against them without ever formally acknowledging the original cause. By the end of the new emperor's 7th year on the throne, both sects would be third-rank powers, unable to challenge the Southern Circuit, and would have ceased to be operational threats. The succession was complete. Yin Wei rode out of the capital with Lin Yu and the 4 senior operators at sundown of the 7th day. He had not, in any of the 7 days, met the new emperor in person. The meeting was scheduled for 2 months later at the Imperial Summer Palace, where Mei Lan would also be present and where the new emperor would formally receive the Southern Circuit's senior representatives for the first time as emperor. The meeting took place on schedule. The new emperor was a man named Wei Chun. He was 43. He was tall and lean and very tired. He had been preparing for the throne for 10 years and had, by the past 2 months, begun to register the actual operational weight of holding it. He received Mei Lan and Yin Wei in the small private receiving chamber at the Summer Palace's 3rd pavilion, alone, with no senior officials present and no record kept of the meeting. He bowed to Mei Lan when she entered. He bowed to Yin Wei. He said, "Patriarch, Steward, I have been waiting for 10 years to meet you. The waiting has been productive. Please sit." They sat. Wei Chun poured the tea himself. He said, The work my faction did across the past decade was, by my own honest accounting, the work of perhaps 300 people. The work your hall did was the work of 2. I have spent a great deal of time, in the past 2 months, considering how to acknowledge the disproportion. The acknowledgement I have arrived at is this. I will not, for the duration of my reign, pretend that the throne I sit on was won without your hall. I will, however, also not pretend in public that the hall was responsible for the winning. The pretense is necessary. The senior court would not accept the public truth. I am informing you of the dual posture so you may calibrate to it. Mei Lan said. We have already calibrated to it. The posture is the one we projected when we signed the alliance. You projected the posture 7 years ago. We did. Wei Chen smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. He said, the Southern Circuit, in the past decade, has been reorganized, by your work, in a manner that I have, from the capital, only been able to read in summary. The summaries indicate that 3 of the first-rank sects whose senior elders had been accepting bribes from court officials for decades have, in the past 3 years, lost their senior elders to a sequence of internal sect disputes that the imperial court has not investigated. The summaries indicate further that the 4 mid-tier sects whose sympathy your hall cultivated during the war have, in the past 5 years, formed an informal council that meets twice a year and that has, in those meetings, begun to draft a set of Southern Circuit reforms that the council will, when ready, present to the imperial court for formal ratification. The summaries indicate, finally, that the Cold Lotus Hall has, in the past 8 years, become the senior administrative center of the Southern Circuit, with operational influence over approximately 70% of the circuit's first-rank and mid-tier sects. Mei Lan said, the summaries are accurate. The reforms the council will present will be presented to the imperial court within the next 2 years. The reforms include 3 categories of items. The first is the formal prohibition of the practices that have caused the senior elders of the relevant sects to be quietly removed by their own internal disputes. The practices include the trafficking of junior disciples, the trafficking of family members for political purposes, the use of cultivation forms that require non-consenting subjects, and the financial corruption of imperial officials. The second category is the establishment of an imperial oversight office for the cultivation world that has the formal authority to investigate sect practices and that operates independently of any single court faction. The third category is the formal recognition of a Southern Circuit governance body, the informal council we have already established, that has consultative authority on imperial matters affecting the circuit. Wei Chen listened. He drank from his cup. He said, the third category is, by my reading of the imperial constitution, technically illegal. The Southern Circuit is not entitled to a consultative body of any formal recognition. The Constitution reserves consultative authority on imperial matters to the senior court only. The Constitution is going to need to be amended. You are proposing to amend the imperial constitution. I am proposing, Your Majesty, that the imperial constitution be amended in the 3rd year of your reign to recognize the Southern Circuit's governance body. The amendment will be modest. It will give the circuit a formal voice on matters that affect the circuit. It will not extend to matters that affect the rest of the empire. The amendment is necessary because the alternative is the indefinite continuation of the current arrangement, in which the senior court's silence about the circuit's worst practices has been the structural condition that allowed the practices to flourish. The amendment ends that arrangement. It does so on terms that are favorable to your reign. Your reign will be remembered as the reign that ended the practices and that established the oversight. Wei Chen looked at her in the late afternoon sun. He said, you are asking me to do, in 3 years, what the imperial court has refused to do for 200. I am. The senior court will not accept the amendment. They will not accept it the first time. They will, by the careful coordination my hall and your court can conduct across the 3 years, accept it the second time. The acceptance will require some senior court officials to be replaced. The replacements will be drawn from the mid-tier officials of the Southern Circuit's governance body, who are, by my read of them, the operators who have spent the past decade preparing for the work of the kind of reform we are discussing. The replacement of the senior court will be the slow, careful task of your reign's first decade. The amendment will be the formal capstone of that decade. The reforms will follow. Wei Chen drank from his cup. He set it down. He said, "You have been preparing this conversation for 10 years. I have. You have, in addition, prepared the operational steps that make the conversation actionable. I have. And you are now asking me to commit to the 10 years of work the actionable steps require. I am." He looked at her for a long count. He said, very quietly, "Patriarch, Your Majesty, I have been waiting for 10 years to be asked this question by someone who had actually done the preparation. I had begun to fear, in the past 2 years, that I would, on taking the throne, have to do the preparation myself, and that I would, by the actuarial limits of my own reign, run out of time before the preparation could be completed. You have, by your own decade of work, removed the fear. The decade ahead is going to be the work I take the throne to do. I am, in this hour, committing to it. Committed. Committed." He poured a second round of tea. He said, "How do we begin? We have already begun. The Reforms Council has its first formal meeting 6 weeks from today. The replacements for the senior court have been identified and are in their current positions waiting for the appropriate openings. The Cold Lotus Hall and your court's intelligence office will, beginning in the 3rd month of your reign, coordinate on the careful sequence of openings that will need to be created. The Frost River Pavilion will handle the logistical side of the Southern Circuit's coordination. The Iron Crane Hall will manage the eastern flank against any further attempts by the eastern sects to interfere. The mid-tier sects of the Southern Circuit's informal council will provide the diplomatic cover. The work has, by every operational measure, been scoped, staffed, and scheduled. We are presenting the schedule to you today because your endorsement is the final piece. You have just given it. We will, by the end of the week, deliver to your court the formal documentation that will allow the work to begin." Wei Chen rose from his cushion. He bowed, a deep formal bow, to Mei Lan and to Yin Wei. That was not the bow of an emperor to subjects, but the bow of one operator to 2 others whose work had made his own work possible. He said, "Thank you, both of you." Mei Lan and Yin Wei rose. They bowed in return. The meeting ended at the 3rd bell. They rode out of the summer palace at dusk. The 20-year work was, on the long ride back to the hall, no longer the 20-year work. It was the 10-year work. The compression had been Wei Chen's contribution. He had, by 10 years of his own preparation, have the time the work would require. He had, by 10 years of his own restraint, allowed Mei Lan's preparation to proceed without imperial interference. He had, in the small private receiving chamber at the Summer Palace's 3rd pavilion, given the final endorsement that turned the long, careful work into operational reality. The work would, by the new schedule, be complete in 10 years. Mei Lan would be 41 when it ended. Yin Wei would be the same age in his current body. They rode east through the dusk in silence for a long while. Mei Lan said, eventually, 10 years. 10 years. We will be done at 41. We will. What do we do at 42? He looked at her in the fading light. He said, "We live, Mei Lan. We live in the hall. We watch the work the hall has set in motion continue under the people we have trained for it. We watch the Southern Circuit become the circuit you imagined when you answered my question that morning 8 years ago. We watch the empire settle into the structure we have helped it find. We sit in the upper chamber in the evenings with Jiao and Wenyu and Linyu, and we drink tea, and we make plans for the next 30 years of the configuration's quiet operation, which will not require any of us to do the kind of work the past decade has required. We have, by what we are about to do, earned the configuration the rest of our lives will take. The configuration will be a long, quiet one. I am looking forward to it. She rode beside him in the fading light. She said, very quietly, "So am I." They rode east. Part 4. The Long Quiet. Chapter 13. A Library in the West. In the 23rd year of Emperor Wei Qin's reign, when Yin Wei was 53 by the count of his current body and Mei Lan was 54, he rode west on a private errand he had not told anyone in the hall about. He took no escort. He rode west across the central plains for 19 days, crossed the western prefecture's border on the 20th, and reached the White Cloud Sect's compound on the 28th. He did not enter the compound. He stopped at the small village outside its lower gate, took a room at the village's only inn, and sat at the inn's window for an afternoon watching the lower gate. He was waiting for a woman. The woman he was waiting for was 63 years old. She had been the senior librarian of the White Cloud Sect's secondary library for the past 41 years. She lived in the small house in the western quarter of the sect that she had been given on her formal retirement 3 years earlier. She came down to the village twice a week to buy fish from the market and to drink tea at the small tea house beside the bridge. It was a market day. She came down the path from the lower gate at the 7th bell of afternoon. He registered her without standing up from the window. She was small. She had been small as a girl. The years had not changed it. Her hair was white. Her hands were the hands of a woman who had spent 40 years with books. She moved slowly. Her companion of the past 40 years walked beside her, a woman of approximately the same age, taller, with the steady patience of a librarian who had spent 40 years catching the smaller woman whenever the smaller woman had stumbled. The two women walked to the fish stall together. They bought fish. They walked to the tea house beside the bridge. They sat at the tea house's outer table in the late afternoon sun with their tea and their parcel of fish, and they spoke to each other in the low, quiet rhythm of two people who had been speaking to each other every day for 40 years and who no longer needed to say very much to communicate what they were saying. Yin Wei watched them from the inn's window for perhaps an hour. He did not approach. He had not, in his ride west across 19 days, been planning to approach. He had been planning to look. He had been planning to confirm, by his own observation, that the disruption he had set in motion 43 years ago had produced the outcome he had projected. It had. Suwan was 63. She had, by every visible indication, lived the quiet life he had given her by intercepting the sword. She had, by every visible indication, been happy in the quiet life. The companion at her side was the companion the novel had not written, and that Suwan, by her own choices in the absence of the path, had found for herself. The two women finished their tea at the 8th bell. They walked back up the path to the lower gate together, slowly, with the smaller one's hand resting in the bend of the taller one's arm. Yin Wei watched them disappear into the compound. He paid the inn's keeper for the room and the tea and rode east at dawn the next morning. He did not return to the western prefecture in his lifetime. He did not tell anyone in the hall about the trip. He had not, in his previous life as a contract killer, ever ridden anywhere for the purpose of confirming that a person he had once made a decision about had ended up in a better place. The previous life had not, by its own operational structure, included such confirmations. The current life had, by Mei Lan's quiet shaping of him across the years, made room for them. He registered the confirmation in the small private part of himself that no one else had access to. He rode east. Chapter 14. The Last Evening of the First Decade. The reforms were ratified by the imperial court in the 10th year of Emperor Wei Qin's reign, 2 months ahead of the schedule Mei Lan had originally projected. The senior court that had refused the first version of the amendment 3 years earlier was, by the patient, careful sequence of replacements the hall and the court had coordinated across the 7 years, no longer the same senior court. The new senior court ratified the amendment by a vote of 41 to 9. The 9 were the last of the old guard. They would retire within 2 further years. Their seats would, in the natural course of the imperial bureaucracy's operations, be filled by mid-tier officials of the Southern Circuit's governance body. The Southern Circuit's reforms became formal imperial law 2 months after the amendment's ratification. The practices the reforms had been written to prohibit were, in operational reality, already prohibited at every first-rank and mid-tier sect in the circuit, because the senior elders who had been engaged in the practices had been removed over the past decade by the careful coordination of the Cold Lotus Hall's intelligence and the Imperial Court's enforcement office. The reforms simply gave the existing operational reality its formal legal recognition. The work was complete. Mei Lan was 41. Yanwei was 41 by the count of his current body. On the evening of the day the reforms became formal law, the five of them, Mei Lan, Yanwei, Jiao, Wenyu, and Linyu, gathered in the upper chamber of the Cold Lotus Hall at the 7th bell, as they had gathered on most evenings for the past 9 years, and they drank tea, and they did not speak for a long while. The chamber was warm. Outside, the river ran cold in the late winter night. The cranes on the river's eastern bank were sleeping. The hall below the chamber was quiet, the disciples in their dormitories, the senior council having dispersed at the 6th bell. Linyu, eventually, said, "The work is done." "It is done," Mei Lan said. "What do we do tomorrow?" Mei Lan looked at her across the chamber. She said, "Tomorrow we drink more tea. We attend to the hall's routine business. We begin the slow work of consolidating what the past decade has built. We have, by my read of the next several years, a great deal of small useful work ahead of us. The work will not require the kind of intensity the past decade has required. The work will require, instead, the kind of patient, steady attention that the configuration in this room is well suited to provide. I am looking forward to it. We will, in addition, take the spring trip the five of us have been postponing for 3 years. We will ride south to the coast. We will spend a month at the sea. We will not do any operational work for the entire month. We will rest. I am being honest with you, looking forward to the month at the sea more than I am looking forward to the consolidation work." Wenyu, beside her, smiled. It was a small, soft smile that did not happen often. She said, "I have been waiting for the sea for 9 years. You have. So have I. So have all of us. We will go." Jiao, across the writing table, set her cup down. She said, "My mother sent a letter this morning. She is 67. She has decided to step back from the pavilion at the end of this year. She is naming me as her formal successor. I will, beginning next spring, be patriarch of the Frost River Pavilion. I will continue to spend a great deal of time at the hall. The configuration we have in this room will continue to be the configuration of my life. The pavilion's daily administration will be conducted by the senior steward my mother and I have been training for the role across the past 3 years. I will not be a daily presence at the pavilion. I will be a presence at the hall." Mei Lan looked at her. She said, "Your mother told me, 3 years ago, that she was preparing the steward for the role. I have known the transition was coming. I am, Jiao, happy that the configuration we have in this room is what you are choosing to keep. It is what I am choosing to keep." "Good." Yanwei watched the 4 of them across the writing table. The 5 women in the chamber, counting himself, the 5 of them, had built, across the past 13 years, a configuration that he had not, on the morning he had woken in this body, expected to build. The configuration had been, in operational terms, the structure on which the past decade of work had been conducted. The configuration had been, in the smaller terms that did not appear in any operational record, the structure on which his own life had quietly been built. He was 41 years old. The body was 41. The man inside it was, by the count of 2 lives, 67. The 2 ages had, across the past 2 decades, slowly merged in his own internal accounting. He no longer thought of himself as the killer who had died in a hotel bathroom on the other side of a world. He thought of himself as the steward of the Cold Lotus Hall. The killer had, in any operational sense, ceased to exist. He had been replaced by the steward. The steward had, by the slow, careful patience of the women in this chamber, become a different man than the killer had been. The steward could read poetry without rolling his eyes. The steward could sit in a chamber with 4 women and a cooling pot of tea and not feel, in any part of himself, that he was wasting operational time. The steward could ride west for 19 days to confirm that a woman he had spared decades ago had lived a happy life, and could ride east without telling anyone he had gone. He had not, in his previous life, been any of those things. He registered, on the evening the reforms became law, that he had become the man he had not known he was building, and that the building had been done, across the years, by the hands of the women at the table with him, who had, by their own careful patient work, made him into the person who could sit at the table with them. He did not say any of this aloud. He drank his tea. Mei Lan, watching him across the chamber, registered the quiet in him and did not, by her own long, careful understanding of him, ask what he was thinking. She had learned, across the years, when to ask and when to wait. This was a moment for waiting. She drank her own tea. The chamber was warm. Outside, in the winter dark, a single owl called once from the trees on the cliff above the hall. The owl called twice more across the next several minutes. After the third call, it went silent. The 5 of them sat in the chamber until the second bell of morning. When the bell rang, they rose, and they put out the lamps, and they went to bed. The hall held its quiet around them. The river ran cold and slow below the cliff. The empire that they had, by 10 years of careful work, helped to reform held its own quiet across the southern continent. The script the world had once been written on had, by the long patient work of a contract killer and a villainess who had refused to die, been torn up and replaced. The replacement was not a script. It was a life. Epilogue. The hall, after the 10th year of the new emperor's reign, settled into the long, careful work of being itself. Mei Lan ruled it for another 34 years. She did not have any further wars. She had, instead, the slow, patient work of consolidation, the training of successors, the management of the southern circuit's continuing reforms, and the quiet pleasure of the configuration she had built in the upper chamber. She died at 75, in her bed, with Yanwei at her side. Yanwei stepped back from the stewardship 2 years after her death. He named, with the senior council's unanimous approval, the successor Mei Lan had been training for the role for 15 years. He moved out of the upper rooms of the hall and into a small house on the river's eastern bank that he had built across the previous several years for the purpose of stepping back into. He lived in the small house for another 11 years. Jiao remained at the pavilion until her own death at 68. She and Yanwei rode between the pavilion and the small house once a season. Wen Yu, who had been the hall's senior healer for 40 years, retired at 63 and moved to the small house with Yanwei. Lin Yu, who had been the hall's senior weapons trainer for the same 40 years, kept her own residence on the cliff above the hall, but spent her evenings at the small house, by long preference, until her own death at 71. The small house held them. It held them across the slow, careful years of the late phase, when the work had been done and the empire had settled and the southern circuit had become the circuit Mei Lan had imagined on a cold morning when she had answered the question Yanwei had asked her over the 7th cup of tea. The empire continued, after all of them were gone, by the structures they had built. The Cold Lotus Hall continued for another 200 years. The southern circuit's reforms held. The Imperial Oversight Office became, across the centuries, the senior administrative body of the empire's cultivation affairs and continued to function long after the dynasty that had founded it had been replaced. The novel that had once described Mei Lan's death had, by then, been lost. No copy of it had ever existed in this world. The world that had once been written on the novel's pages had, by the long patient work of the woman who had been written to die and the man who had refused to let her, become a world that did not need a novel to describe it. It was simply a world. It held. The villainess lived, and lived, and lived. Fin.